The wind sighed across the plains, carrying with it the smell of dust and the faint sweetness of dry grass. It swept through a broken homestead where boards hung loose, windows rattled, and silence lived louder than joy. In the doorway stood a woman, thin as a shadow, her arms full of crying infants. 3 small voices, soft and piercing, rose against the heavy quiet. Behind her, boots struck the floor like thunder. Each step closer, each step heavier, each step a warning. Her face bore no smile, only the dull ache of one who had long forgotten how to hope. Her husband, hard-eyed and mean-spirited, did not look at the babies as flesh of his flesh. He looked at them as curses, burdens delivered by a god he thought had turned cruel. Daughters, he spat, 3 at once, as if the heavens mocked him. In his world, sons carried names, daughters carried shame. He turned cold, colder than winter nights that froze wells to stone. No hand reached to comfort her when she struggled to feed 3 mouths. No pride filled him when neighbors came to see the newborns. Instead, whispers gathered like vultures. They said she had angered the Lord, that such a birth was unnatural. They said a man should not have to keep a woman who only gave him girls. At church steps, they looked away from her, their eyes avoiding the bruises they pretended not to see. Yet the whispers followed her home, and she carried them on her back with a weight of hunger and fear. Still, within that weight, a quiet strength lived. At night, when the babies stirred and whimpered, she hummed lullabies, soft as a prayer. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. Her hands, though rough with work, were gentle as she tucked cloth around their tiny bodies. She gave them warmth, though she had none for herself. She shielded them from cold drafts with her own thin frame, enduring the shiver that rattled her bones. She found small mercies in small acts. A scrap of bread softened in warm milk, a lullaby hummed while her heart ached, a smile stolen from one child's sleepy breath. The man who had sworn to protect her gave nothing but scorn. His cruelty came in waves, neglect that left her alone to tend the homestead, words sharper than spurs, strikes that left marks on skin already worn thin. She endured in silence, for her cries brought no mercy. In town, she walked with her head bowed, the 3 babies bundled close, her steps unsteady beneath the weight. Folks watched her pass, some with pity, some with judgment, but none with help. Among them was a figure set apart. A rancher, solitary as the hills he worked, stood near the blacksmith's forge. He was a man of quiet bearing, a man who had long carried his own shadows. He watched her once, her face pale, bruises half hidden, yet her arms full of life she refused to let go of. She did not see him, not truly, but he saw her, saw not the curse others named, but the endurance etched into her every step. He said nothing, only felt the stir of something unspoken, something long forgotten, deep within. The days dragged heavy. Seasons turned, but brought no relief. Then came the storm that tore the last thread of her tether. Rain lashed against the homestead. The wind rattled the windows like the fists of an angry ghost. Her husband's rage burned hotter than the storm. With curses spilling from his lips, he dragged her and the babies to the door. He shoved them out into the night, into mud and darkness, into cold that cut sharper than knives. His voice carried behind her that she was no wife of his, that the brats were no blessing, that she was nothing but a weight. The door slammed shut, leaving her with only the storm for company. She staggered forward, clutching her daughters, her bare feet sinking in wet earth. The babies cried against her chest, their tiny voices drowned by the howl of the wind. Her dress clung to her body, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. She pressed her cheek to the soft crowns of her children's heads, whispering words they were too small to understand. "Keep breathing, my loves. Keep breathing." Through the darkness, through the storm, she walked. She did not know where the road would lead, only that she could not turn back. Each step was a plea to survive, each heartbeat a fragile thread holding for lives together. Her legs threatened to give way, yet she stumbled on. Then, from beyond the rain, came a sound. Hoofbeats, steady and sure, cutting through the storm's roar. A shadow grew in the night, a horseman emerging where moments before there had been only blackness. He reined in his mount, the lantern at his saddle casting a faint glow across his face. The lonely rancher sat tall, rain streaming off his hat brim, his eyes falling on the woman hunched against the wind. She clutched her daughters, as if they were her last breath. The horse stilled, steam rising from its flanks, as the man leaned forward slightly, his gaze lingering. The woman, too weak to speak, only met his eyes for the briefest moment. Then her knees gave out, the mud swallowing her as she sank, the infants still pressed to her chest. The storm roared on, but in that moment, a silence hung between them. A silence heavy as fate itself. A fire crackled in the hearth, its glow painting the walls with slow-moving shadows. The storm had passed, but the air inside the ranch house was still thick with silence. 3 tiny bundles lay near the fire, their small breaths rising and falling beneath blankets far too large for their bodies. The woman sat upright on a chair near them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes darted toward the door, the windows, the man who moved quietly across the room. He had brought her here without words, only a steady hand to help her from the mud, only a nod toward the saddle when she looked at him in weary disbelief. Now inside his home, she waited for demands, for threats, for some cruelty to reveal itself. Men always wanted something. She kept her body still, her face unreadable, though her heart raced. The rancher did not speak. He hung his hat on a peg, set a pot over the fire, moved about with the calm of someone who had lived long with only silence for company. When the food was ready, he placed a plate on the table near her, then returned to his chair. No explanations, no questions, only the quiet rhythm of firelight and spoon against bowl. She did not touch the food at first. Suspicion weighed heavier than hunger. But when one of her daughters stirred and whimpered, she reached for the plate, eating slowly, her eyes never leaving him. He offered nothing more than a brief glance toward the children, as though to say they would not freeze under his roof. Night deepened. The house, though plain and bare, carried a certain stillness that pressed against her nerves. She laid her daughters on a folded quilt by the fire, sitting rigid beside them, every muscle taut. She did not sleep. But when her eyelids grew heavy, she saw him still at his chair, boots by the door, head lowered in thought. He had not touched her, had not spoken more than a handful of words. That alone confused her. In the days that followed, his presence grew familiar, though not yet comfortable. He rose before dawn, his footsteps steady on the porch, the creak of barn doors swinging wide. He worked with the rhythm of someone who had done the same tasks year after year, feeding stock, hauling water, repairing fences. He came back inside with dust on his clothes, washed his hands, and cooked simple meals without ceremony. Always quiet, always leaving room for her to breathe. She expected impatience, yet none came. She expected harshness, but the air stayed calm. When she flinched at the scrape of a chair or the slam of wind against the shutters, he noticed, slowing his movements. When she bent her head to hide a bruise that had not yet faded, he made no comment. It was the small things that unsettled her heart. One morning she found him carving wood near the porch, shavings curling around his boots. By evening, a rough cradle stood near the hearth, sturdy though plain. He set it down without a word, glancing only once at the babies as he passed her on the way to the barn. Days later, a rocker appeared by the fire, its creak slow and gentle. She lowered herself into it, one of her daughters against her chest, and for the first time in months her back rested easy. Gratitude ached in her throat, though she spoke no thanks. Loneliness still clung to him, visible in the lines of his face, in the way he lingered near the children without touching them. His past showed itself in fragments, an extra plate he never used, a folded quilt in the corner that bore the faint scent of lavender long faded. The way he sometimes stared out the window, as if expecting a figure to return. She knew that kind of emptiness. She recognized the silence of someone who had lost more than words could name. The triplets filled the house with sounds he had long forgotten. Their coos, their sudden laughter, their cries in the night. He moved through it with quiet acceptance, never irritated, never harsh. Once, she caught him standing in the doorway, listening as one of the girls gurgled at the sight of firelight dancing on the ceiling. His mouth softened, almost a smile, though he turned away quickly. When she ventured into town with him, eyes followed. Whispers curled behind their backs. The cursed woman, they said, and the lonely rancher who had taken her in. Some looked with pity, others with scorn. A few shook their heads, as though already waiting for tragedy. But one woman, a shopkeeper with a kind gaze, spoke softly to her as she wrapped bread and paper. "Your little ones are beautiful," she murmured. The words struck deeper than kindness should, leaving the mother's eyes wet as she carried her bundle home. Not all were kind. A ranch hand from the neighboring spread leaned against the hitching post, his eyes sharp with disdain. "Don't bring trouble to these parts," he muttered loud enough for them to hear. The rancher's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, guiding her back to the wagon. His silence spoke louder than any threat could. The days lengthened. Slowly, she began to breathe easier. She no longer woke each morning expecting a blow. She no longer braced herself for harsh words at every mistake. Instead, she watched him repair fences, carry wood, tend cattle, his movements steady as the passing seasons. She realized she had begun to trust the rhythm of his silence. One night, when the fire burned low and the babies slept soundly, she sat in the rocker, her hands folded in her lap. The house was quiet, save for the creak of wood beneath her and the sigh of the wind against the shutters. He sat across the room, sharpening a blade with slow strokes. The lantern threw light across his face, worn but steady. Her voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." His hand stilled for a moment, the rasp of steel against stone fading. He looked up, meeting her eyes. His reply was soft, roughened by years of quiet. "You're safe here. That's all that matters." The words lingered between them, glowing like a lantern in the dark, fragile yet steady, a promise carried not by grand vows, but by quiet truth. Spring arrived slowly at the ranch, brushing the land with color and scent. Wild flowers bent in the breeze, their delicate heads nodding like tiny sentinels over the waking earth. The Triplet girls toddled across the grass, their laughter bright and clear, chasing away years of silence that had once clung to the hills and barns. The wind carried their joy through the open windows, stirring curtains, dust, and memory alike, and the woman felt something shift deep within her chest, a weight easing she had long forgotten even existed. The ranch, once quiet and hollow, seemed to awaken alongside them. The barn doors creaked open to reveal not only animals, but a presence she had learned to call home. She found herself humming along with their laughter, the sound catching in her throat, trembling yet steady. Meals became more than sustenance. She stirred the stew with a quiet pride, arranging plates and bread with careful hands, noticing the girls' tiny fingers reaching, the sparkle in their eyes as they tasted something warm and filling. She mended fences with his guidance, learning not only how to drive nails and tie knots, but how to move through the world with calm determination rather than fear. The rancher's presence remained steady, a constant pulse beneath the blossoming days. Together, they patched a leaking roof, the boards creaking underfoot, his hand briefly brushing hers as she held the hammer. She froze for a heartbeat, expecting a reprimand, a demand, or worse, yet found only patience. His hands guided, steadied, but never commanded. When the girl's laughter rose, and she felt it ripple through her like a river thawing ice, he simply watched from the porch, eyes soft, steady, understanding, without speaking. Even as life returned, a shadow lingered. She wondered if she deserved this peace, this sudden abundance of warmth and laughter. Nightmares haunted her sleep, shadows of her husband's cruelty rising in dreams, echoes of his voice sharp and bitter. Often she awoke with a start, clutching the girls, her body trembling. He would be there, quietly brushing her hair from her face, a hand on her shoulder, never pressing, never demanding more than she could give. His silence became a sanctuary, a shield stronger than words. Love began in these quiet gestures, subtle as the dawn. One morning, he led one of the girls to the stable, gently lifting her onto the back of a calm horse. She watched from a distance, her heart tight with a mixture of fear and awe. The girl wobbled, small hands clutching, then smiled, the corners of her mouth curving into sunlight. The rancher's hand steadied her, his touch firm yet gentle. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden, as she realized a future was possible. Not one defined by fear, not one constrained by cruelty, but one built slowly, tenderly, day by day. Their connection grew in quiet moments, a shared look across the fire, hands brushing while stacking hay, the simple act of passing a cup of water, never needing words to explain what had taken root between them. Love was not declared in grand speeches. It was sown into the rhythm of daily life, into the steady pulse of protection and care, into the small mercy of presence. But the past would not stay buried. One afternoon, the wind carried an old shadow onto the horizon. Her husband arrived at the edge of the ranch, bitterness coiled around him like a whip. He demanded the children, his voice carrying accusation and ownership, calling the rancher a thief, claiming the land and the children were his by right. Townsfolk appeared, some peering from behind fences, others stepping forward to see which side they would choose. Murmurs spread through the air like wildfire. Some sided with the rancher, seeing the truth of his protection, while others lingered near the old man, swayed by fear or habit, or by the cruel sway of tradition. The woman felt her pulse tighten, a familiar dread clawing at her chest. Yet she stood tall, her children close, the rancher's shadow steady behind her. No words came, only the unspoken promise between them, the bond formed of quiet care, resilience, and shared survival. He finally stepped forward, voice low but unwavering, eyes meeting hers as much as the intruder's. "You're coming with me, not back to him." She felt the weight of those words settle, like sunlight across a long winter night. Not possession, not ownership, but protection. A vow spoken without chains, without demand, carrying instead the freedom and safety she had not known she could have. In that moment, with her children tucked safely in her arms, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers across the ranch, she understood what it meant to be shielded, to be seen, and to finally be home. Dawn broke over the ranch like a slow burn, painting the plains with gold and shadow. Long-reaching shadows stretched across the fields as the rhythm of hoofbeats grew louder, heavier, like thunder rolling across the open land. The woman stood at the edge of the porch, her arms wrapped around the triplets, each tiny body a fragile heartbeat against her chest. She felt the wind catch at her hair, carrying with it a scent she had thought she'd never face again, sweat, leather, and the sharp edge of anger. Across the field, a group of riders emerged, dust trailing behind their horses. At their center, the cruel man who had once thrown her into the storm rode, with a sneer etched deep into his face. His men flanked him, eyes hard, hands near weapons, all of them fueled by the certainty that they were owed something they had never earned. He demanded her back, his voice slicing through the air, each word a whip meant to unmoor her courage. He called the rancher a thief, a protector of what was his, and claimed the children as his property. The rancher stepped forward, rifle held loosely, but with steady intent. His voice cut across the wind, calm yet unwavering. "She's not yours to hurt anymore." The words struck like a bell, resonant, carrying a weight beyond mere defiance. He did not aim to intimidate, only to protect, and the clarity in his stance made the intruders hesitate for a heartbeat too long. Tension coiled tight over the land, thick as the dust kicked up by the horses. Not all threats needed gunfire to wound. Words flew sharper than bullets. The townfolk arrived slowly, curious, wary, some hiding behind fences or peering from doorways, forced to take sides in a conflict that was more than ownership. It was justice. It was protection. It was the right to live without fear. Murmurs and arguments rose, some swayed by habit, others moved by the woman's presence, by the quiet courage she had carried in silence for so long. She stepped forward then, the first time her voice broke into the morning with the clarity of steel wrapped in velvet. "She will never return to him," she said, each word deliberate, each one cutting the thread of the past. Not with anger, not with threat, but with the truth of a heart that refused to be owned. Her children pressed closer, their small hands clutching her clothes, their eyes wide but trusting. She felt the power in the simple act of speaking aloud what she had carried in silence, and for the first time she saw the faces of some of the townsfolk soften, their doubts giving way to understanding. Violence erupted as the cruel man lashed out, shots fired across the open yard, the sound cracking against the wooden beams of the barn. Dust and smoke mingled with the morning light, the world spinning in flashes of chaos. The rancher moved like a shadow with intent, shielding her and the children, taking hits that drew blood but never bent his will. His arms were steady, his body a wall of protection, his eyes always on the children, always on the woman who had trusted him enough to stand beside him. The townsfolk, watching the display of courage and truth, found their own voices and hands. Some raised rifles of their own. Some surged forward to block the abuser, inspired by the strength she had shown and the quiet power of the man who had stood with her. The balance shifted, the cruel man faltering as the world he had expected to bend to him refused to. At last, he was driven away, retreating across the plains, defeated and disgraced. Dust trailed from his boots, his pride shattered, his threat dissolved into memory. The rancher collapsed to one knee, blood streaked across his chest, but she knelt beside him, her hands steadying his shoulders, brushing rain and dirt from his face. Her fingers trembled as they pressed to his wounds, her heart echoing relief and gratitude. The triplets clung to them both, their small arms grasping, their tiny voices murmuring comfort and recognition. They were not broken, not damaged, not forsaken. They were whole, a testament to survival, to courage, to the bonds that had been forged in quiet days and stormy nights alike. The wind shifted, soft now, carrying the scent of wild grass and sun-warmed earth. The narrator's voice drifts softly across the plains, over the hills, and through the hearts of those who listen. Love is not possession, nor is it born of grand gestures. It is found in safety, in kindness, in the quiet vow that says, "You're coming with me, not because I need you, but because we walk stronger side by side." And in that gentle truth, the ranch stands silent, steadfast, a witness to lives mended, hearts protected, and the unbroken promise of family found in the slow, patient bloom of trust and care.